Welcome to the Flying Octopus Podcast, offering a new perspective on Red Wings hockey, as well as all the important news from around the NHL. And now, here are your hosts, Tony Wolak, Devin Little, and Evan Sabrin.
Hey, it's Carter Bear, and you're listening to the Flying Octopus Podcast.
Welcome to episode 49 of the Flying Octopus Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Sabrin, joined as always by Tony Wolak and Devin Little. On Tuesday, August 19th, the Red Wings organization announced they are putting former Red Wings superstar and Hockey Hall of Famer Sergei Fedorov's number 91 jersey up in the rafters at Little Caesars Arena. This is something that we here at the Flying Octopus felt was long overdue. I think we found the right guest to tackle this subject on today's episode, and it's someone that Red Wings fans are quite familiar with. We hope you enjoy our interview today with former Free Press sports writer Keith Gave. Take a listen. He was the Red Wings beat writer for the Detroit Free Press for 15 years, starting in 1984. He's the author of the book The Russian Five, which he brought to the big screen in 2018 as a writer and producer. His other books include The Grind Line, Vlad the Impaler, and A Miracle of Their Own. In 1989, he played a key role in helping bring Sergei Fedorov and Vladimir Konstantinov over to North America to play for the Red Wings. We are elated today to have Keith Gave on the Flying Octopus Podcast. Keith, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to do this, and I'm very excited to talk to you.
Well, I'm honored that you asked. I'm glad to be here, and it's nice to have something to talk about related to the Red Wings these days, right?
Yeah, I know. It's something that I know all of us here have been waiting for a very long time, and to see it finally come to fruition this week was just something amazing. But I do have an interesting story for something that happened to me, and it happened to me just last night, Keith. I came home after playing poorly in my men's 45 and up beer league, and I was going through our show notes for today and kind of just making sure we had all the I's dotted and T's crossed and whatever. And I had Spectrum News on in the background, and it's basically the channel that just automatically comes up when you turn our smart TV on. So it's basically just white noise in the background. And after the third or fourth trip to the kitchen raiding my 5-year-old's snack drawer, I looked up the television, and they were doing a feature on these old Hollywood theaters and how some of them are being renovated, how some of the people who are investing in and buying them and updating them. And I swear to God, Keith, they were doing a feature on the movie that I saw The Russian Five at back in 2018.
Wow.
Last night. And I thought, what are the odds of that, knowing that I was getting a chance to interview and speak to you today?
That's pretty cool. That's very cool. And I got to tell you, those old movie theaters are amazing, aren't they? And it really, the Renaissance in Detroit, Detroit's come a long way in the last 30, 40 years. Started when Mike and Marion Illich bought the Fox Theater and renovated that downtown. We started to have a theater district. Then they started building ballparks down there. Now downtown Detroit is the place to be these days. It's pretty cool.
Keith, I'm told you're semi-retired, and I can only consume fishing as much as possible up there in northern Michigan, enjoying life. But can you walk us through a day in the life of Keith Gave right now?
Oh, my Lord. Every day's different. I'm retired. I'm really trying to write another book. I don't know whether I can squeeze one out or not, but, I got to say, writing books is a lot easier compared to trying to sell the damn things. Selling them is hard, but I spend a lot of my time doing that, doing things like this, and writing a little bit, trying to get out and fish a little bit. I have 3 golden retrievers who like to swim in Houghton Lake this time of year. We spend a lot of time on the boat these days. As a matter of fact, when we wrap up right here this evening, we're going to take an evening cruise and take the dog swimming again tonight. So it's a pretty. I'm very, very, very fortunate. It's a pretty good life. Thank you.
So, Keith, one of the things I wanted to start off with is I find your career path fascinating, to say the least. It almost plays out like a movie, and I know your fans, Red Wing fans, everyone would line up to see it. You grew up in Macomb County, and in 1971, you spent time in Monterey, California, where you learned to speak Russian. You then spent 6 years with the U.S. Army working for the National Security Agency, and you even spent time in West Berlin before the wall came down as a Russian linguist. You then returned to Detroit, become one of the most iconic sports writers in Michigan history. You covered the Tigers in 1984, and then you went on to cover the Red Wings. After that part of your story, I know there were some stops along the way, Chicago and Dallas. You earned a Pulitzer Prize nomination there. You then left the industry to teach and write books, including the world-renowned Russian Five, which you then brought to the big screen in a highly acclaimed documentary. I guess what I'm trying to find out is, how does this all tie itself together in regards to the person you are today?
Well, honestly, Evan, it continues to evolve, actually. This Russian Five story of mine continues to have legs, and I'll tell you why. I mean, we keep the publisher keeps calling us. We got to print more. We got to print more. The book continues to sell. I had a chance to work as a writer producer on a documentary that won lots of awards and so on. I'm very proud of that as well. But for the last 3 years or so, I've been working with a film company in Los Angeles that has been committed to making a feature film about the Russian Five. And it's really, I'm breaking a little news here. I can't say too much about it, but this is going to happen. We worked a long time on this thing. I haven't so much, but other people have. There's a big global, you'd recognize the name of the film studio involved. You'd certainly recognize the names of a couple of A-list actors that are committed to this thing. An A-list screenwriter who has begun to write the script for the Russian Five. And it's really not so much the story of the whole Russian Five like the book tells and the documentary film. It's more the early part. It's that espionage and defection part that they're intrigued. The way they sold it, this smaller film company that came to me and went to LA to kind of pitch the film as Argo meets Moneyball. It's that secrecy, diplomacy, defection, espionage part that seems to intrigue everybody, and it can. And I'm going to be a little bit involved in helping to tell that story on the real big screen in the next. I don't know how long these things take, but they want to have the screenplay done by this fall and start shooting sometime next year, is what I'm told.
Well, if you need a place to stay, Keith, I have a guest house here, and be more than be able to accommodate you on your trip to California and Los Angeles. I'd be happy to show you around and talk hockey with you. I did want to ask you too, though. So in 1971, when you moved to Monterey, California, where you learned to speak Russian, what was behind that driving force that led you to do that?
That's an easy question. It kept me out of Vietnam.
Okay.
Kept me out of Vietnam. Listen, that's the truth. I mean, I was drafted in December of 1970. The bottom line is I was going to a private school that I really couldn't afford to be going to. And my parents were tapped out. They couldn't co-sign any more student loans for me. I had to take my junior year, the fall semester, my junior year off to work in the same factory my father worked at. In order to get enough money so I could enroll again in January of my junior year. And sadly, in December of that year, December 1970, I got a letter from Richard Nixon. It said, "Greetings." It was my draft notice. And I did not want to be drafted and certainly wind up in Southeast Asia like 500,000 other young American men and women. I didn't want to go to war. And rather than be drafted for 2 years, I enlisted for 4 on the condition that they send me to language school out in Monterey, California, to study Russian for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for a year, and then send me to an intelligence school and on to West Berlin. I had those 4 years pretty well mapped out. I wound up spending 6 years in the Army because I was working hard while I was in the Army to finish my bachelor's degree while I was in. I had some children, while I was in the Army and so on. And the bonus money that I got for an extra 2 years in the Army gave us a little bit of money to travel around Europe my last couple of years there.
And you said you spent 3 years in West Berlin. What can you tell us about that time?
Well, it was in a state-of-the-art listening post on a hill in the forest in West Berlin, and working in a darkened room with all this exotic electronic equipment, basically, keeping track of the bad guys on the other side of the wall. And I'm talking bad guys of Russians, East Germans, Czechs, Poles, Romanians, and so on, all the East Bloc troops that might be over there for their Warsaw Pact exercises. It was that. It was doing that, 24/7, doing that job. And really, it's pretty low level intelligence work. I never really had any cloak and dagger assignments until I got out of the Army and got into sports writing at the Detroit Free Press, and I got a good one.
And that leads me to my next question. How do we tie in the sports journalism to working for the National Security Agency? You went from the NSA to becoming this iconic sports writer for the Free Press, covering the Tigers, like you said, in 1984 first, but then focusing on the Red Wings.
Right.
How does this all tie together?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me when I think about it and how did I get from there to here? It's kind of crazy. I could have never planned it that way, mapped it out, and said, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to get there. When I got to Michigan State University a couple of weeks after I got out of the Army, I enrolled in the graduate program in Russian. I thought I could get enough degrees in Russian that I might be able to teach the language someday. But there's only one problem with that plan. Americans don't speak other languages. They don't study other languages. And they certainly don't study a language like Russian because it's hard. And the very few teaching jobs that there are in this country go to Russians who emigrate here, know the language by heart. I was never going to get a job teaching Russian. So I looked for something else that I might be able to do to use my language skills. And I spoke with Dr. George Huff, who was the dean of the School of Journalism at Michigan State at the time. And he got me all excited. I mean, he kind of leaned forward and said, "You speak Russian?" "Yeah." You speak German?" "I learned to speak German a little bit, living there for 3 years." He said, "My God," he said, "you could be an international incident someday." meaning, if I could get into journalism, get myself assigned to Moscow, covering the news over there, get myself thrown out of the country like happens to a lot of reporters. You come over here, you kind of put your career on cruise control. You're a managing editor at a paper somewhere, and you're off and running. Yeah, that all sounded pretty good to me. So I started, he leaned forward. He said, "Don't tell anybody I told you this, but you don't need any degrees in journalism." He said, "What you do is take a handful of classes. That's all you really need. Learn the basics. Get yourself a job at the Lansing State Journal. Work there for a little while until you know the business. Then try to go to work for the AP, the Associated Press, the world's largest news gathering organization, and they'll send you to Moscow." And that's exactly what happened.
That is fascinating.
That's exactly what happened.
How difficult was it to learn Russian?
Well, it's a hard language. There were very few languages out there. They teach them all out there in Monterey still. The Chinese Mandarin was a harder language to learn, but Russian was pretty tough because we learned to read, write, and speak the language. But it's also kind of a beautiful language, it was hard, but there was incentive, Evan. There was incentive to do well and graduate from the program, because if I didn't, I'd wind up in Vietnam anyways, probably. That's what I was trying to avoid. So, and it was still tough enough. We started out with about 75 students in my cohort class at the time and graduated 48. So we lost more than a third. It was kind of, and we're talking about all services, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, and the guys in the suits, CIA, NSA, Department of Defense, whatever, all learning Russian. We all learned it together in these little classrooms on a hill in Monterey, overlooking Monterey Bay, a beautiful setting to learn anything.
And was sports journalism the way you always wanted to go?
No, it really wasn't. I really was. I kind of had my arrow pointed at working in Moscow someday, right? I mean, I want to go there I was intrigued by covering the news, and in fact, when I started at the Lansing State Journal, I worked on the sports desk for about 6 months, and I got hired on the city desk as a news reporter. And I worked there about 3 years. I learned as much as I had to learn there, and I got a job at the Chicago Bureau of the Associated Press, and that was in March of 1982. In March of 1984, I got a call from the foreign desk editor in New York saying, "We're going to post a job. We have an opening in Moscow. We encourage you to apply if you're still interested." What they were doing was filling the job before they posted it, like smart managers do, right? But so I applied for it. 2 weeks later, I got offered the job in Moscow, and I'm pretty excited. And I called my parents back home in New Baltimore, and and told them, that I got the dream job of a lifetime, and they were happy for me. But my mom called me a couple of days later and said, "Do you have to go back to Europe now? Your dad's pretty sick." My dad was battling breast cancer at the time, and he didn't have long to go. And I said, "You know what, Mom? I don't have to go now. I'll put this thing on hold." I actually resigned from the AP in the spring of '84. I came home to Detroit, talked to some folks at the Free Press, the sports editor there. He said, "You know what? We need some help. We need some help covering the Tigers this summer. Are you interested?" Yeah, okay, I am. And I worked there till covering the Tigers all the way through the World Series. And then I was assigned to the city desk. I was a news reporter for a year on the city desk at the Free Press, and enjoying the heck out of myself. And then we had two jobs came open on our sports desk at the time: the NBA job covering the Pistons, the NHL job covered the Red Wings. And I said, "You know what? This is Detroit, the greatest sports city in the country. Sports is important to people. If you write for a living, you want people to read what you write. And I know if I write sports at one of the Detroit papers, people are going to read what I write." And so the sports editor basically said, "If you had your choice, which job would you take, the NBA, the Pistons, or the Red Wings?" And I thought for about 5 seconds. I said, "The Red Wings." He said, "Why? They're terrible." I said, "Yeah, but they make a lot of news. They always find a way to wind up on the front page, on page one, usually by doing something crazy." And I'm a news guy. And so he offered me the job, and I took it. That was in the summer of '85. My first big story to cover that summer, was the defection of Peter Klima from Czechoslovakia. Mm-hmm. That was my first big story. And then my first year, '85-'86, was the worst. I covered the worst season in the history of the Detroit Red Wings, 100-year history. It remains the worst season. They fired 2 coaches my first year. And then by the next year, they hired a funny little French guy to coach, Jacques Demers, who turned the team around in a remarkable fashion. And by 1989, they had kind of plateaued. They weren't going any better fast enough. And that's when they started drafting the Russians. And in '89, they drafted Sergei Fedorov in the 4th round and Vladimir Konstantinov in the 11th round. And they needed to get him over here. And that's when I had a crazy surprise call from Jim Lights, the Ilitch's son-in-law, the executive vice president of the team, whose job it was to try and get those Russians over here to play hockey in Detroit for the Red Wings. And I was Jim's first phone call.
I'm curious, that meeting. First off, did you really meet at the Elwood Grill?
Yep.
As it says in the documentary? Okay.
Yep.
That's cool. That's something I did want to ask you here about. Speaking of that meeting with Jim Lights, when you did meet up with him, did you have any idea what he was going to ask you, or what he was, looking to meet you with? You had no idea.
No. Here's the thing. He called me. It was the middle of summer. It was mid to late July, and he called me right out of the blue, and it surprised me because the only time I'd ever heard of from Lights ever was when he was pissed off about something that I'd written in the paper. Jim Lights was the attack dog for the Ilitches, right? And it was rare, not uncommon, but rare. But I had no idea what he wanted to talk about. And he said, "Do you think we can meet for lunch?" I said, "Yeah, sure. When?" He said, "Well, can we meet tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure. What's this all about?" He said, "We'll talk about it tomorrow." He didn't want to tell me, so he kind of dropped it on me when we met for lunch the next day, and I was astounded that he would ask me, the beat writer for the Detroit Free Press covering his team, to do him a favor, to do the Red Wings a favor, because it was something that I really shouldn't have done ethically.
Right. And I know you said in the documentary at the time that you were worried about, or you had concerns about journalists being used as pawns in acts of espionage. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Well, the history is full of stories about that, especially during the Cold War. The KGB and the CIA using reporters to as intermediaries to pass along messages and so on. There are stories of really network correspondents being on the payroll of some of the spy agencies of this country. So, but still, I had served my time working for the NSA. Now I was working for the Detroit Free Press. I loved my job. I didn't want to put it in jeopardy, but at the same time, frankly, I was offended when Light said, we're talking about a lot of money here. We're willing to pay you a lot of money, and I started to get really offended. But I was a little intrigued too when he mentioned six figures, because I know where that starts, and there's a lot of money for a schmuck making what I was making at the Free Press at the time. But I said, Jim, I really can't do this. I would get fired from my job that I love if people were to find out about it. And he said, okay, well, I understand. It was worth a shot anyways. But what he wanted me to do, he said, was go over there. He found out that the Russian national team was having a training camp in Finland, in Helsinki, Finland, and they were going to play a game against one of the Finnish club teams on this particular date, August 10th or 11th, something like that. And maybe I, as a NHL beat writer with NHL credentials and so on, could go over there and request an audience with these guys under the auspices of interviewing them for my newspaper and so on. And it was a good plan. But I said, I just can't do that in good conscience. And we just agreed to, let it go at that. And, but I couldn't let it go in my mind. I thought about it for several days, 3 or 4 days anyways. And I called him back and I said, Jim, there might be a way we can do this. And he said, what's that? And I said, I'll go over there and try and pass along a message, but I won't take a dime from you. I'll pay my own. I'll cash in some air miles. I'll go there. I'll pay for everything, all my expenses. I'll do my best to get them the messages on one condition. He said, "What's that?" I said, "If these guys come over there, I want to be your first phone call." And you guys are in the news business. You know what I'm talking about. I was doing what happens in the news business every single day, all over the world. I was a beat guy making a deal with a source. I'll do this if you do that. And even my editors at the Free Press, who didn't find out about this until the book was published, even they thought I was on pretty firm ground. They wish they would have known, but they never did. But anyways, I said, this is what I'll do if you promise to do that. And he said, deal. And about 2 weeks later, I was on my way to Helsinki, Finland, writing letters on the airplane over there to these guys, basically explaining that the Red Wings wanted them to come over to defect and come over and play hockey for the Detroit Red Wings. And when to make a long story a little longer, I was touch and go whether I was even going to see these guys, get an audience with them. But I lucked out. I got the audience with them, and they learned at that moment when I was talking with them, that was the first time that they had heard that they'd been drafted by an NHL team, long before the internet, right, and the way things are today. And at the same time, we were being closely monitored by a KGB guy about 8 feet away from us.
Can you describe the range of emotions you were going through on that flight over to Helsinki, Finland? Were you scared? Were you nervous? Were you confident? What was going through your head while you were on that plane ride?
I was nervous. I was scared. I mean, this is a pretty big deal, and I didn't want to screw it up. But I was on my way to Helsinki, Finland. I was going to arrive there, and in fact, I did arrive there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I needed to find a hockey game somewhere. I didn't even know where it was. I was asking around the airport trying to find out, and some guy overheard me asking at the money currency exchange. He said, "Oh, you're looking for hockey tonight?" "Yeah, one of our club teams is playing the Soviets, and it's at the Olympic Stadium." And I said, I said, that's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Is there a hotel nearby? Yeah, there's a Radisson hotel right across the park. So I grabbed my bag. I got in a cab, went to the Radisson, checked in, didn't have reservations, didn't know where I was going, right? But I checked in, took a quick shower, walked across the park, and I got to the stadium just as the Soviets were getting off the bus. And then I flashed my NHL credentials at the door, walked in, no problem, went to a little coffee shop, grabbed a cup of coffee, and the room was full of NHL people there. General managers, coaches, scouts, all of them had players that they had drafted that were playing in this game with the Soviets, right? But I was the only reporter there. And they looked at me like, oh man, I with my credentials, I could actually make contact with them and have a conversation with them if I'm lucky enough. They couldn't without causing real problems for themselves, their teams, and their players. But I was just a lowly media guy, right? I was just a sports writer. And I found a guy, one of the promoters was able to get me downstairs. And he said, I will try, but I'm not sure that. He said, you know how the Russians are. They don't play the game like the rest of us play. I said, well, that's all we can do is try. And I was standing against the wall. I was nervous. I was a little bit scared. I knew there was a KGB guy right down because he kept looking at me, and I'm waiting there nervously. And they brought Vladdy and Sergei out. Right out of the showers, man. They had a white towel around their waist. They were dripping with water. They had goosebumps all over. There's a sheet of ice right behind us. And I introduced myself as this reporter from Detroit. I had the Detroit's draft list there with me. And there's Sergei. There's you are in the number 4, 74th overall. Vladdy, there's you, And Sergei acted like he showed no emotion. None at all. Be a real good card player, Sergei would. Vladdy, when I showed Vladdy his name on the Detroit Red Wings list, he was like bouncing around like the kid who got the shiny blue bike for his birthday. It was pretty cool. His reaction, very, very different than Sergei's. And, I handed them each a media guide, and inside the media guide was the letter that I wrote to each of them. And it wasn't really well concealed. That's when I started to get really nervous because people have asked me many times if I was scared, if I was nervous. I was not scared for myself as much as I was for those guys, because if they got caught with that stuff, I would worry about what might happen to them. Obviously, they didn't, and things worked out. But that's what made me most nervous. As soon as I passed along the message that they needed to get, I broke it off pretty quickly. I basically in Russian, I said, "Thank you very much. I will try and contact you down the road for." A more in-depth interview so I can write about you and introduce you to the readers of my newspaper. But in the meantime, good luck and thank you for your time. And then I left and I spent about the next 3 hours walking around the city, looking over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't being followed. The bad spy movies, and got back to my hotel room and made a quick call to Lights. It was about 7:30 back in Detroit then, and said, Jim, I was able to talk to these guys. I passed along the messages. Lights was really, really excited. He says, oh my God, thanks very much so much. I can't wait to tell Mr. Ilitch. She's going to be so excited, so happy. And that I said, Jim, just remember keep your end of the bargain. This is really important. Nobody's got to know, nobody can know about this, but I really want you to play ball with me now that we've got this thing done. And it was about 11 months later, in July, I'm at my home in Dearborn at the time, and my phone rang in the evening, and Keith, and I said, yeah, this is Jim Lights. I said, oh, hi, Jim, how you doing? He said, great. He said, I'm flying. I'm in Mr. Ilitch's airplane flying back from Portland, Oregon. Guess who's sitting next to me? And I said, who would that be? And he said, Sergei Fedorov. I said, oh, great. And I pushed my plate away. I grabbed my notebook and I started taking notes, looking at my watch. I talked about 10 minutes, got everything I needed. And then I grabbed my phone to call the Free Press. But I didn't call the sports desk. I called the city desk and they're on deadline. And one of the harried assistant city editors answered the phone. And I said, yeah, this is Keith Gabe. He said, yeah, what do you want? Hockey doesn't start for 3 months. I said, yeah, but what do you get going on page 1 tomorrow? He said, why? What do you care? I said, well, because whatever you have going on page one tomorrow, I'm going to blow out of the water. He said, what's that? I said, there's a Soviet defector in Mike Ilitch's airplane right now coming to Detroit to play hockey for the Detroit Red Wings. Short pause. You got 35 minutes. So I hung up the phone. I grabbed my laptop and I typed my ass off for 35 minutes. I hit the button, sent my story to the city desk. And the next morning, my newspaper arrived way back in the good old days when the newspaper arrived on your doorstep 7 days a week. Grabbed the newspaper and opened it up, and there was page one above the fold. Soviet defector on his way to play hockey for the Red Wings. And that's how the Russian Five got started.
Now, you mentioned that, you couldn't tell anybody about your role in this whole process, but there was something I read about the story that you just told that you were worried almost gave it away. And that had to do with the weather conditions in Helsinki at the time.
Yeah. I kind of screwed up. I added too much detail into the story, and the whoever was the copy editor, called me and said, "How would you know it was a steamy, sultry night in Helsinki?" And I was doing some really fast thinking. I said, "Well, I was talking to Lights, who talked to the guy who was there, and and it just gave me that detail. It was an unusually hot night in Helsinki, and this guy was there, and I don't know whether I convinced her or not, but I think it stayed in the story, as I recall. But yeah, I almost screwed the pooch on that one.
I mean, and like I said, your story plays out like a movie, and I'm curious when the autobiography version of Keith Gave comes out. And if so, if a movie follows, who plays Keith Gave?
You got to stay tuned, man. I can't tell you. It's pretty, it's unbelievable. The people that they have who are committed to playing this, the one to play my role and wanted to play Jim Lights, the two main characters. It's jaw dropping. It was jaw dropping to me, and it will be to others when they hear it. And as soon as I can, I'll tell you, but I can't now. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fascinating to hear, Keith. It's an amazing story that you've lived through your life. I do want to jump forward now to this week's news. And what was your first reaction when you heard the news that the Ilitches have finally decided to hang number 91 up in the rafters? What went through your head when you first heard that on Tuesday?
Yeah, my first thought was, what happened to Marian Ilitch? I worried that something happened to her, because I know if anybody ever mentioned in her family that it's time to retire Sergei Fedorov's number, her automatic response would be, over my dead body. She's 92 years old now. She's still with us, but they decided to do this. Marian Ilitch, and like Mike, valued loyalty above all else when it comes to all their employees, especially their hockey players, they're willing to pay $10 million a year to play. And Sergei, they feel, Sergei Fedorov betrayed them not once, but twice. And I didn't think we would ever see Sergei's number retired as long as she was drawing a breath. I was wrong about that. And I'm frankly, I'm happy for Sergei, because he earned it, right? I mean, come on. He was one of the best players. He was the best player in the world for 2 or 3 years at least. The guy could play all 5 positions, not goalie, but defense in all 3 forward positions. He was great. Don't tell me Alex Ovechkin is the best Russian Soviet hockey player ever. So that's Sergei Fedorov. It took Ovechkin most of his career before he could find the defensive zone of the rink that he was playing on, right? He scored a lot of goals. That's great. But anyway, Sergei earned this honor, and I'm really happy to hear that. But there's also a real cynical part of me that said, this is a money grab too. They're retiring it on a slow Monday night in January 12th against Carolina. Probably weren't selling a lot of seats. the other part of it is I've never seen, even in the worst years of the Wings have had in my tenure from 85 on, I've never seen the anger, frustration, and vitriol really aimed at the Red Wings, including the iconic general manager, Steve Yzerman. I mean, a lot of people want him fired, and the things social media is an ugly place. I understand, but I think that this is a move to change the narrative a little bit, throw the season ticket holders a bone, that and putting the Hockey Town word across the logo at center ice and all these other things. I think they're trying to distract people from what might be 10 years of not make the playoffs. So all those things went through my mind. But bottom line, I'm thrilled for Sergei. I know how much he values this honor. I know how much he wanted it. I have a pretty good idea how much he regrets leaving Detroit that second time, and the way he left Detroit by leaving $10 million on the table to leave and go play for the Anaheim Mighty Ducks at the time. If he had to do it all over again, he would have stayed in Detroit. I'm sure of that. But he left, and it's taken this long to get his number retired.
It's interesting. Maybe 4 or 5 episodes ago, we talked about just like the centennial season, and I think it's when the Hockey Town logo was announced or when that option was presented, and we were talking. We sort of had the same perspective of like, you're only going to have one centennial season. You need to maximize that from a business standpoint. Like sometimes fans forget about that, is like these teams still got to make money. And while attendance hasn't been a problem as of late, the team hasn't been doing very well. So with this, you need to maximize the opportunity with the Hockey Town logo and like trying to have your best team in the last few years, trying to make the playoffs, like really, really sell the whole 100 years thing. Sure. But I did have one question, and you touched on it a little bit. When Sergei signed with the Ducks in 2003, I know leading up to that, there was conversation. Obviously, you mentioned that the Red Wings had offered him more money than what he ended up signing for with Anaheim. I actually wrote a piece that launched for the Hockey Writers earlier today about what happened. What if he re-signed, and kind of what Detroit's trajectory would look like with that in mind, and would Datsuk have developed in the same way? Would Dave Lewis have stayed around for longer? Those sorts of things. But
sure.
And of course, the lockout came, and having a very high cap hit was not great for a $39 million salary cap in 2005. It's crazy far we've come. But do you have any indication about how close Sergei was to re-signing during that season, or even leading up to when he signed with the Ducks? Like, was it ever close, or was it always sort of not what he was, focused on at the time?
Well, I've talked to Jim Delano about this many times, and each time I talk with him, I get more detail. And, first of all, they were a little worried because he had signed the offer sheet from Carolina back in '98, right after the Olympics. And that put the Ilitches in a little bit of a bind. They actually had to see bankers and make sure they had enough cash on hand to pay Sergei really about $28 million in a matter of a few months, because his team won another Stanley Cup. So they were a little bit worried. So they worked really hard when his contract was up. Devellano and Holland both were talking with agents. Sergei had a couple of agents, and they weren't sure which agent who really could speak for Sergei. And the other person that Sergei was getting a lot of really bad advice from was his father, Victor. And the Wings could never pin anybody down. And they got really frustrated. And Mike Ilitch got really frustrated and told Devellano, he said, I want you to get Sergei in here. You get Ken Holland in here, Sergei, yourself, and me, and we're going to get this thing done. And they called Sergei. They brought him in, just the 4 of them. And Mike Ilitch said, Sergei, we want to make you a Red Wing for the rest of your career. It's really important to us. We hope it's important to you. We're going to offer you $10 million a year for 5 years, $50 million. And Sergei said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Ilitch. I'll think about it and get back with you." And he shook their hands and he left. And Ilitch looked at the other two guys and said, "Well, that's it. He's gone." And they said, "What do you mean? He just said he was going to think about it." And Mike Ilitch said, "No, you don't have to think about an offer like that." And a few days later, he signed with Anaheim with Brian Murray, the general manager out there, who was his coach and general manager when he came to Detroit. So they had a little bit of, some trust going on with Brian. But he signed for $40 million for 4 years, $10 million a year. But he left $10 million on the table to leave Detroit. And frankly, I can't blame the ownership family for thinking the way they have all these years. I don't blame them at all.
It's kind of interesting how free agency sort of it used to play out, because if you look back at the calendar, Sergei signed with Anaheim middle of July, like after July 1st, and now if Elliot Friedman hasn't reported it by noon on July 1st, it's not going to happen. So
right.
Pretty interesting that a marquee player like him made it that long without signing, and still the Reds were able to sign Ray Whitney a few days later. Like, not obviously a 1-for-1 replacement, but certainly not today's NHL, at least.
No.
But I did want to ask you, obviously we've all seen the documentary, The Russian Five. I had a chance to talk with Josh Reel a few years back about the work that he did for it. There's a scene towards the beginning where like Sergei had just come over and he was talking about like just like life in America. And sure, like people have the memories of Sergei, sports cars, like the flashiness, the white Nikes, all that. But there's a scene where he's just like watching color TV and playing video games. And I like to think that when the spotlight is not on him, he's like a very different person, like way more personable. Like tell us a little bit about Sergei, like away from the spotlight.
Yeah, Sergei is he's really kind, bright, articulate. He's a really nice person. He's the kind of guy you'd like to have as your friend. It was hard for him to show a lot of it because there was the demands and the pressure on him were so great when he first got over here, not just to play good hockey, but to learn how we do things in America, including learn our language and all those things. And I remember when I saw him. It might have been when he right after he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think 2015. He and Nick Lidstrom. And he was at Joe Louis to be honored, with Nick as new Hall of Fame members. And he ran into Sam Lights, Jim Light's son, who is now an executive with the Dallas Stars. And Sam was just a little kid at the time, right? But Sergei saw him and his eyes lit up. He said, Sammy. He said, there's the guy who taught me English. When Sam was 3, 4, 5 years old, they would play video games together and talk. And that's how Sergei learned, But to see his face light up, he's a really warm, decent man. He's a decent guy. And I know how much this has hurt him, not having his number up there. That's what all players want to see, their number up there. It was important to Peter Klima thought he'd see his number up there one day. That never happened. But players think about it. It is a high honor. The only higher honor than that? You make the Hall of Fame, right? But the way the team treats you, you can have your number hung, and then what else can they do? They make a statue. I don't know if we'll see a Sergei Fedorov statue or not, but he's got his number up there where it should be, and I really, really looking forward to seeing him again. I think when the next time we see him is going to be a big sigh of relief, and he's gonna open up big time to all of us, I think, and really, really let us get to know Sergei. I have. Especially since the war started over there, I try to keep track with in touch with him and Slava Fetisov, with an email every now and then, just checking in. How you doing? How is everything okay? Yeah, we're okay. It's different. It's tough, but we're doing okay. But he's a good man. He's a good man, and this is an honor very well deserved.
You mentioned Slava Fetisov there, and I'm curious about when he came over after Fedorov had been with the Red Wings for a few years. What kind of presence did he bring for the younger Russians when he first joined the Red Wings?
Huge, huge, huge. It can't be overstated. This guy, he was, well, they call him Papa Bear.
Yep.
The way I was fascinated the way the younger Russians treated him with such respect. I mean, I saw where, the younger guys, they're young, they're having fun in the dress. It's a dressing room, you're showering, change clothes, making jokes, whatever. And I can remember one time the three of them were kind of giggling in their corner a little bit, and I see Fetisov, about 4 or 5 blocks away, just kind of like, just he mumbled his Russian. It was hard for me to understand, but these three just about locked heels, and it was. And they stopped whatever they're doing. Then he got back to business of whatever. Just they quit fooling around. But the way and he did that on the ice too. They take a time out. Dave Lewis tells this story really great. I think I tell it in maybe in the Vlad the Impaler book. But they can take a time out. The five Russians will come to the bench, and Scotty say something, and Fetisov would bark at the other four, and then Larionov would bark some more because Larionov had the same kind of respect as Fetisov did, really. And it would kind of go down the line, and Vladdy would be the last guy getting it. It was the way they played kind of telephone right down the line. It was pretty funny to watch. Dave Lewis just got a real big kick out of it. And I wish he could tell this story, but Vladdy was always getting dumped on at the end. But those two guys, Fetisov and Larionov, had a tremendous effect on those young guys and made them better NHL players.
I read in 1997, after the Red Wings swept the Philadelphia Flyers for the Stanley Cup, you had a memorable exchange with Sergei in the locker room. Can you share that with us?
Well, yeah, I think it's a story. I mean, it was a very, very hot, crowded dressing room with, I was trying to take notes, and I gave that up because the champagne was going all over, and I couldn't read my smeared notes. And so I just went around kind of shaking hands and congratulating everybody. And I got in the corner where Sergei was, and believe it or not, Sergei was surrounded by really, really beautiful girls. One of them was Anna Kournikova. But I said, Sergei, you're busy. I just want to shake hands, say Molodets, way to go, that a boy. Congratulations. And he said, thank you. And as I was leaving, he leaned over and he said, Keith. I said, yeah. He said, you remember the night in Helsinki a long time ago? And I said, yes, Sergei, I remember. He said, I never tell anybody. I said, good, Sergei, please don't tell anybody. But guys, it was that very moment that I said, I got to write this book. This has got to be a book, right? But that's where it really dawned on me that I had a good book in my hands, and at some point down the road, I was going to be able to write that thing. But it was a pretty neat moment.
You talked a little bit about Slava Kozlov as well. I know you had some interactions with him and a memorable interaction with his father as well. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that. And I'm also curious. In the documentary, Darren McCarty said that Kozlov was kind of the hard ass, not always in a good mood guy. He mentioned in the documentary, he would say, hey, Kozlov, Slava, how you doing? And Kozlov would bark back, F you, McCarty. Can you tell me about his kind of persona and what that interaction was with his father that you had over in Russia?
Yeah, first of all, that's locker room shtick. I mean, that's a game that Slava played with those guys. Slava Kozlov is one of the kindest, sweetest, most caring men I've ever met, people I've ever met. When during the lockout in 94, the fall of 94, when the very first lockout, when Slava Fetisov and Igor Larionov took a bunch of the Russian players, including Sergei Fedorov, back to Russia for like 5 games of kind of five games around the country where they could show off the NHL stars who had all left the NHL or left Russia to go play in the NHL, right? It was a junket, and Kozlov was over there, and he was not invited among a lot of the other players to go. He was too young, too new. But Slava went over there anyways, and he played for the kind of the Red Army team against the NHL Stars. But while we were over there, Slava asked me to visit his home in Voskresensk, which is a suburb of Moscow. And I went to his home, met his family, his mother, his father, his grandfather, and had just a wonderful afternoon, kind of seeing the inside of this otherwise middle-class Russian family, and that's when his father Anatoly took me outside and showed me this little spot in the yard. There's a little low lying, like a dimple in the side of the house, between the house and an apple tree. He said in the fall, the rains come, it fills up with water, and then it gets cold, and we have ice. And he said, this right here, this is where Slava first learned how to skate. And I kind of got chills down my back, it was just a spot, maybe 12 by 12, if that, but enough ice to put the little kid on skates and push him around. And they only lived about, a couple of blocks from the beautiful little arena in Voskresensk, where Anatoly was he was a hockey coach. So Slava got a lot of ice time in the rink as well, obviously, but he learned how to skate, on a little patch of ice right outside of his house. Kind of cool.
Have you had a chance to talk to Sergei yet?
No, not since
the announcement.
The announcement, no. And I'm sure he's a little busy. He's going to probably take him from now until January to get approval to travel over here. For God's sakes, it's not easy for those guys to come and go anymore. I don't think Slava Fetisov can get out of the country. I don't think he has a passport to travel anymore.
So, Keith, the thing that I really like and respect about you is that as much as you are known for being a journalist and an author, you're a hockey guy, and I've learned with that. Let me tell you. And so, with that in mind, I actually have a lot of kind of modern day hockey questions for you, but we'll stick with Sergei here real quick. You mentioned. You mentioned you didn't think this was going to happen while Marian Ilitch was still drawing breath. You mentioned, now that this is happening, we're going to see Sergei open up a bit more. Maybe we'll just see him more. There was a little bit of a nugget of information. I don't even know if you can call it information, but going around the last couple of days that this could kind of lead to maybe a role within the organization for Sergei. I'm kind of curious from your perspective if you see that as a possibility, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I don't see it as a possibility. I know a lot of people would. It feels right. It does. I know, but it's one of the reasons why Sergei left Detroit in the first place, and it was his father always putting it in the idea in his ear. You need your own team. You got to get away from the shadow of Steve Yzerman. If Steve Yzerman decided to retire and right off into the sunset, they got a new general manager here. All bets are off. We might see Sergei Fedorov here doing, maybe running the team as a GM. He did a really good job with Red Army when he went back there as general manager and then coach. He's successful at both. So I could see it, but I can't see it as long as Steve Yzerman's here. That's just my thinking. I really thought that we had a chance to see it when they were looking at different coaches the last few years. I thought we might see Gerard Gallant here. He and Yzerman were joined at the hip. Gallant, rode his left wing for many, many years and took good care of him and turned out to be a pretty good coach in the NHL. But when Detroit had a potential opening, Gerard Gallant never got a call from his buddy and his good friend, Steve Yzerman. And I can tell you this, it has hurt Gerard Gallant. He's not a happy camper, and he's pretty bitter right now about how he's been treated by a guy who was once one of his best friends, is Steve Yzerman.
I know, if I can piggyback on that, I know obviously Lidstrom works in the NHL or with the Red Wings. Draper, Maltby, Pat Verbeek did. The list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Is Yzerman, does he carefully choose which friends to pull in for different roles, or is this more of a relationship thing with the players or the former players and former teammates if they're not with the team?
Yeah, I think Steve Yzerman's pretty cold-blooded when it comes to that part of the business. I think he looks for people he thinks are the best to perform those roles. He had Pat Verbeek both in Tampa Bay and in Detroit. Pat's now out and I covered Pat when he was a member of the Stanley Cup team in Dallas in 1999. Really good guy and great player, and it's turning out to be a good general manager. And now he's got Chris Draper as one of his assistant GMs. Maltby as a pro scout. I think it's not about friendship with Steve Yzerman. It's about, can you do the job or not? Can I trust you to do this job or not? And is it working? I don't know if you can say it's working. They've had some pretty good first round draft picks, but they've had a whole bunch of second round draft picks that haven't done much over the last little while, right? They had like 14 number 2 draft picks, and not many of them are on a straight trajectory to the NHL right now. So the jury's still out. But are they getting everything they can get out of their scouting staff in this continent? I know they're getting it in Europe, but I'm not sure about here. And that's something that he's got to look at. But I think when it comes to who he's going to put in various roles, he's really cold-blooded. It's not about friendship at all.
I think that this is a really good segue to my next question. Right now, and you kind of alluded to it when we first started here with social media and whatnot. From my perspective, there are two groups of Red Wings fans right now. There are the fans that still have patience and the fans that have run out of it.
Right.
I'm kind of curious where you stand when it comes to where the Red Wings are right now with their rebuild. And from where you stand, what would you say to people on the other side of the fence?
Yeah. Well, what I get asked, I get asked this every day. It feels like what I feel is Steve Yzerman inherited a really bad situation. It was really bad. I don't think people really appreciate how bad it was with the contracts that they had, the terms of the contracts, the no trade clauses to a lot of very marginal players who shouldn't have any of that stuff. Ken Holland got very, very generous. He felt Ken Holland had a tendency late in his career to fall in love with players and give them too much. And it really, he had to really overhaul the entire roster, just about get rid of all those contracts. Didn't have a whole lot of money to play with. And now when you finally, you get things turned around, you finish at the bottom of the standings, and you should start getting some pretty good draft picks, right? They get screwed by the draft lottery. There's luck involved here too. And they had nothing but bad luck in the draft lottery. The one amazing thing when you think about it is when they should have had the first overall pick because they finished last by a mile, they wound up, because of the way the ping pong balls went, they wound up with the 4th overall pick. And who did they get with the 4th overall pick? The best player in the draft. I mean, this is history repeating itself, because back in 1983, when there were 4 really good players to be drafted, Mike Ilitch just wanted any of the first 3, most notably Pat LaFontaine. And Ilitch actually had Yzerman said, or not Yzerman, Devlano, Jimmy, go offer your buddy Bill Torrey, the GM of the Islanders, go offer him $1 million for swapping draft picks with us so we can get the 3rd pick and we could pick Pat LaFontaine. Yep. And Jimmy put his hand on Mike's arm and said, Mike, save your money. I got a feeling this is going to work out okay. Let's just see what happens. And Minnesota surprised everybody by drafting the high school kid, Brian Lawton, 1st overall, then Sylvain Turgeon, then Pat LaFontaine. Mike Ilitch's head sunk. 4th overall, they drafted this skinny little kid who wound up, coming to the table wearing a red tie. And the Red Wings, Denise tells this story. Denise Ilitch tells this story very well. They kind of fell in love with this kid at first sight. Steve Yzerman, they drafted with the 4th pick overall, who wound up being best player in that draft, right? 4th overall pick, much like Lucas Raymond many years later.
I think that might be a pretty analogous start to their rebuild currently, with Moritz Seider's wide-eyed reaction for when he got Yzerman's first pick. And Devin, I feel like once a month, you and I beat the drum of they didn't win the lottery, but they got Seider and Raymond, and those were top 3 picks in each of their draft classes. Yep. So they kind of did win the lottery.
Absolutely.
They did. That's Steve Yzerman being, I think, a very, very, very good judge of talent. He took Braden Point in Tampa in the 3rd round. He got a little lucky, but this guy knows talent, and I'm not about to give up on Steve Yzerman. I think he knows what he's doing. He asks us to be patient. We have to be more patient, but I think in the end, I think we're going to be okay. But it's been taking time.
So I'm going to circle back to Sergei, kind of. Obviously, 91's finally going to be retired. My question for you, Keith, is: do you have anyone in mind? What's the next number that should be retired?
Oh man, I think 40 is going to be retired. Henrik Zetterberg. I think Chris Osgood's number should be retired. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. And I'm going to throw one at you. It's going to take a while for Pavel Datsyuk to get retired, number 13, because he pissed the Ilitches off too, the whole team off when he left to go back to Russia with a year left on his contract. He wanted to leave after the first year of his 3-year contract, and he stayed and didn't play all that well, but he screwed the team anyways, and so they're not going to be in a hurry to put 13 up there, much like Sergei this time. But I'll throw another one out there. A number I think that should be up there. He'll never be in the Hall of Fame, but he's one of the most important players in the history of this franchise. Is Chris Draper.
Ooh,
look at his numbers, especially his playoff numbers. This is the guy who led the grind line, who took the opening face-off of the 1997 Stanley Cup Finals against Eric Lindros. The grind line scored 2 goals in that first period, and the route was on. Chris Draper his numbers are staggering. He's a 4th-line guy only because you had Steve Yzerman, Sergei Fedorov, and Igor Larionov, not necessarily in that order. Yzerman was a 3rd-line center on that team, but then Chris Draper. And as Doug McLean said, who coached those guys too, and Doug McLean's the guy who traded for Chris Draper for 70 cents, a Canadian dollar. Don't call the grind line a 4th line. They're like a 2nd line, a 2nd and a half line on every other team in the NHL at the time. But because of all the talent Detroit had, they're wind up being maybe the greatest 4th line in the history of the NHL. But I think 33 belongs up there.
What about 16?
Oh God, yeah. Absolutely, I do. If he hadn't been hurt, they would have won another couple of Stanley Cups. But Nick Lidstrom wouldn't have won all those Norris trophies. He wouldn't have won 7 Norris trophies. Vladdy would have won a couple, or they would have split votes. And guys like Chris
Pronger.
Yeah, Chris Pronger. Guys like that would have won Norris trophies. 16, I think, belongs up there. He was one of the best that finished second in the Norris balloting in 97 that year. Never signed a big contract, sadly, which is why he needs a little bit of help these days. But absolutely. But then all of a sudden you're just talking about a whole bunch of retired numbers up there, and
sure.
It should be special. That's why I've advocated in the Grindline book. It's time to maybe start one of those Ring of Honors, and recognize all there's 100 years of players that we've had now. There's a lot more who deserve some significant special attention. Maybe not hang their numbers and retire their numbers, but certainly honor them in another way. And a Ring of Honor or something like that it's time, I think.
For sure. And if you go back, obviously, throughout those 100 years, there's players like, Larry O'Ree, Marty Pavlich,
Marty Pavlich. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Marcel Pronovos too. They won't have their jerseys retired, but it is they should be recognized in some way. And it's nice that they retired Red Kelly's jersey eventually. But yeah, Draper, certainly fitting, top 20 Red Wing of all time for sure, even with all the guys from way back when. But yeah, Ring of Honor is certainly something that I'm not sure why it hasn't been done yet, or it's part of the Centennial season.
Yeah.
Whole business deal.
If they were smart, that's the way to do it. They don't have to retire numbers, but they could start with, they say, even 10 players to start that they want to put, and you don't include anybody who's already got their numbers up, up on the rafters, but they could have special nights for all these guys, and it would be some really cool evenings at Little Caesars Arena to honor some of those people, a little bit less heralded, but very deserving. Yeah.
You also teed this up really well a little bit earlier, too. You mentioned Sergei Fedorov could play all 5 positions. Very unique talent. I'm curious if there is anyone active in the NHL right now that reminds you of Sergei Fedorov in any way.
Whoa. No, not even close, really. Not even close. I haven't seen anybody like that in a long. Those are pretty rare people who can skate like that. There are people who can do tricks. The Michigan goal, and all that stuff. But lots of speed in the game today. Not a lot of smarts in the game today. A lot of great, high scoring forwards who again couldn't play defense if their life depended on it. No, I look for a player like that one day. I'd like to see. But would Kirill Kaprizov be close? I haven't seen enough of him to know. I'd like to see him. See what his defensive game is like. But I mean, Sergei was an MVP, a 2-time Selke Award winner. And the 50 goal scorer, and on and on and on, the things that he could do. And like Scotty Bowman said, if I kept him on defense, he'd win a Norris Trophy. Those kinds of players don't grow on trees, man. That's why we were so very, very fortunate to watch him play. And then we had a chance to watch him play with 4 of his Soviet teammates all at the same time. Were we lucky or what? I thank Scotty Bowman for putting those guys together. And the grind line together. Scotty, he and I had our ups and downs as beat writer and coach, but we worked things out. And every time I see him, I say, Scotty, thanks for doing what you did. You gave me a championship team to cover, and I'm forever grateful about that.
You touched on it a little earlier, but I'm curious about how your views are on how society today consumes media. We're in a world of clickbaiting, likes, views. There's so many different apps and platforms where people can, come on and say that they're a journalist and give their opinion, whether it's politics, sports, or whatever. I know you've taught journalism. I know you spent a lot of time teaching journalism there in Michigan. Mm-hmm. What would you say to today's younger generation now, considering all the facts of how media works? What would you say to the younger generation that wants to get into sports journalism?
Oh, man. Be careful what you wish for is what I would tell them. I wouldn't want my job that I had at the Free Press for anything in the world these days because of, first, Sports Talk Radio did a number on what we do in newspapers, and then the internet comes along, and this is a tough time to be a legitimate sports writer, credible newsman. I don't care whether you can write sports, politics, whatever you write. And what I guess my advice to young people is to be careful what you consume out there and how you consume it, and make sure you understand who's written the news that you're reading. Where did it come from? What kind of credibility do these people have? Which is why I'm pretty limited in what I read out there, and I read a little bit of the news in the Free Press, but I read the Athletic, the New York Times, the Athletic, the Atlantic, credible news sources. There's so few and far between these days. The ones that I trust, anyways. I always if I come across a story on another platform that I like, I always check it, see, who wrote it. And I'll look at the byline and I'll do a little Google search and see what's this person's credentials. Can I trust what he or she is writing? It's hard to trust anything out there anymore. It's all about trust, and it's hard to find. Credible news is kind of rare because there's so much junk out there, and it is really, really frustrating to me. Really frustrating, and I'm not very optimistic, to be honest. I don't know how we fix it. I don't know that we can fix it, and it's demoralizing to me because I spent my life writing the news, trying to chase the news, and you establish a relationship with your readers. They can trust you. They look forward to what you write, and they'll give you a little hell for it every now and then. But they know it comes from the right place. And I never was critical of the coach or players without doing my homework. It wasn't my opinion. My criticism was based on interviews that I did with scouts and GMs and other players and opponents and so on. You roll it all together. And now if I develop an opinion from all that homework, I feel pretty good about it. And the players knew it too. They knew it wasn't just my opinion. They knew I did my homework. We don't get enough of that in today's journalism, as far as I'm concerned.
And then you add AI into the mix nowadays, and it's getting even scarier these days.
Yes.
And it's a crazy world out there. Last thing before I let you go, we need a good book recommendation.
A good book recommendation?
Yes, I know you're an avid reader.
Oh gosh,
we've read all your books, so.
Well, one of my favorite writers in the world these days is a guy named Frederick Bachman. Any of you guys know Frederick Bachman?
I do not.
You should get to know him. I'm reading his latest book now called My Friends. But Frederick Bachman is a Swedish writer, and he wrote a trilogy. It's called the Beartown Trilogy. It starts with Beartown and Winners and Losers, and then Us Against You, a trilogy. Hockey, set in Sweden. And it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And the guy writes in ways that'll make you laugh and cry in a single sentence. Frederick Bachman, Backman, like Backman, Frederick. And anything he wrote, he also wrote his biggest book is A Man Called Ove, or Ove, O-V-E, A Man Called Ove. That was his first big book, put him on the map. But anything you pick up and read of his, you'll fall in love with. But Beartown, if you're hockey people, you should read Beartown Trilogy.
Keith, we have a close friend of the show Shane Malloy, who is a scout for EP. He has his own Sirius XM amateur radio show.
Listen to him all the time.
Yeah. He's been somewhat of a mentor for me as the past 2 years, who's kind of shown me the ropes. I've been going to the NHL drafts and accompanying him. And the one thing he will always remind me when speaking to him is that always thank your guests, because time is the most valuable thing you can give someone. And for what you gave us today, Keith, I cannot thank you enough. This was probably the most fascinating hockey conversation I've ever had. I'm sure it is for the rest of us too. So again, I thank you for everything and your time and spending this time with us today, because it was a very special moment for this show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And tell Shane, keep up the good work. He does really good work for NHL radio. That's for sure.
I will. And last thing, is there anything where, you want to plug here before we let you go?
I think I've taken enough of your time. I've talked about, the film that might be, and so on. I just, the Grindline book is out there. It's doing pretty well. It's a fun read. And, I think every one of those four guys tell Scotty Bowman stories that'll warm your heart. And it was the fun part for me was telling a lot of good Scotty stories from those guys.
He's Keith Gave. Thank you very much, Mr. Gave. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. You bet. Take care.
That was real fun. What did you guys think? I mean, we got some scoops there. A couple scoops there.
One or two scoops for sure. Like ice cream parlor over here.
Just gonna say, suddenly I want some mint chocolate chip.
Guys, before we wrap today's show, Tony, random Red Wing of the week.
So I've been thinking about this since we recorded last week, and this Red Wing random for sure played for the team in the last 30 years. First clue, he played 110 games with the franchise. The second clue was he helped the team discover Damian Brunner.
Oh.
And the third clue is he was an expansion franchise pick away from the Red Wings. Think about that last clue. There's only so many expansion teams since, Nashville entered the league.
Oh, is Nashville the hint?
No, because Doug Brown played more than 110 games with the Red Wings.
Let's not forget, guys, I gave you a super secret bonus hint last week that really put you guys over the top to pull David Booth out of your butt.
I'm really focusing on the Brunner part. Ooh.
Yeah, I know. I am too.
All right. And let me know if you need your super secret bonus clue.
What's the secret clue?
Your super secret bonus clue is up until this summer, he has been an executive with the Tampa Bay Lightning.
I do know it. Yes. It's Stacey Roast, something like that.
Bingo.
Oh, that's right. That was a good one. That's a team that you don't really remember or think about in Red Wings history. But yeah, that is a good one. So thanks for watching episode 49 of the Flying Octopus Podcast. Amazing show today. You hear from the great Keith Gabe, and some of the stories he told are things that I'm going to remember for a very long time. So look forward to next week. We did tease last week that we were going to have former NHL goaltender Brent Johnson on the show this week. But with the Sergei Fedorov news, we felt that bringing in Keith Gabe was more time appropriate. So we look forward to talking to Brent next week. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Flying Octopus Podcast. Follow us on YouTube at the Flying Octopus channel and Twitter at Flying Octopod.